This is Dan Farisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. So happy to be joined today by Brian Grahn, who is Regional Sales Manager, Southwest US with Clearcom. We are going to be talking about all manner of things today, Brian. Excited to chat about IP-based systems, the shift to wireless, all that good stuff. But before we get into it, again, I just want to greet you. Welcome here. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. As I say, you are Regional Sales Manager, Southwest USA with Clearcom. Do you want to talk a little bit about Clearcom and about your own background a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So, ClearComm, if those aren't familiar, we specialize in real-time voice communication systems. The company was started back in 1968 in San Francisco area. Started back in the kind of rock and roll days when the technicians needed a way to talk from front of house to the stage or communicate with follow spots of who actually is going to be on stage having a solo at a given time. And at that point, they created this distributed amplifier system, which is a two-wire party line intercom. A lot of the terminology that a lot of people know nowadays, it's all the same technology that we have in our analog world that was developed in 1968 that we're still producing today. Um, Personally, I started as a live sound engineer, kind of a failed musician turned technician, as many common story. Worked in nightclubs and house of worship, and started working on more of the system design aspects for installations, and then eventually became a sales manager at a regional company in Chicago area, managing everything from loudspeaker systems, wireless, intercom, digital console systems, all of that. And now I've been with Clearcom for almost 3 years.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for that run through. And I absolutely agree with you. Just having been in the industry for about 20 years, I think a lot of people follow a track or a trajectory very similar to yours. They started in music, maybe they were in a band or a roadie or something like that. It is a very common story, but it's fantastic to have so much talent, flowing into our industry by all these different means. And I'm glad you've been with Clearcom for a few years, a true industry leader, a company I've been following for 20 years, and really excited to be able to learn even more about what you're doing and kind of the trends you have your finger on.
Yeah, great.
So let's start with some of those trends, in particular, the shift to IP-based systems. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that is something that Clearcom is really focusing on?
Definitely. So, again, for much of our history, we focused on the analog two-wire systems. And for many years, that's just been creating more efficient, easier to manufacture, more robust analog systems. But a few years ago now, we developed our HelixNet digital party line technology, and that was really our first step into the belt pack form factor for IP-based systems. And the idea there is the greater the complexity of a system with simpler cabling options. And at that time, the AV industry was slowly moving towards the IP domain. But as we've continued to develop in that world, both our HelixNet and our digital wireless systems, we are seeing more and more IP infrastructure that's going in for a lot of times dedicated audio over IP protocols, whether that's console systems or proprietary protocols, things like that. And then over time, we found that it's just so much easier to rely on converged IP infrastructure as long as we play, the rules with kind of the types of protocols that we're using in those systems. And again, can allow for much greater complexity of a system to be run over just a few strands of fiber throughout a facility.
I think that's such a good point too, because I remember, in my previous publication, Sound and Communications, talking about that like separated infrastructure versus converged infrastructure. There was really a debate going on. It does seem like that idea of converged infrastructure has really captured people's imagination. As for the reason, as you say, it does give you a lot more ability. It kind of decomplexifies things and it gives you much more capability. But at the same time, you do have to play by the rules of the road, don't you? You have to make sure that you're adhering to the standards of security, et cetera, for that converged infrastructure.
Exactly. And in our newer products, we've now started relying on the AES 67 protocol as a standard for both our wireless transceiver systems as well as our newer um, digital matrix panels. Um, and in the end, we're trying to simplify the infrastructure that might be needed, so that again there isn't dedicated copper lines needing to be run through an entire facility just for a single channel of party line to be distributed to green rooms or backstage areas or across a broadcast control room. And so you can have more flexibility for picking off specific lines of communication between different users, all off of one kind of simplified network.
Yeah, yeah. Simplified, streamlined, flexible. That seems to be what the appetite is these days. And it seems like you're speaking exactly to that. Give us that streamlined simplicity, give us maximum flexibility to enable to affect the outcome that we want.
Yeah. And I would be remiss for not mentioning our Arcadia Central Station. For a long time, we've had a few different proprietary ClearComm protocols, mostly that revolve around our instant voice core technology. But for a long time, that was a HelixNet base station that was needed to run that protocol, a FreeSpeak base station that was needed to run the wireless system protocol, a dedicated Dante or some other kind of interface to bring other kinds of audio over IP protocols into the system. And recently, a few years ago, we released our Arcadia Central Station, which is baking all of those different systems into one RACU now.
Mhm.
And so giving users the flexibility to say, I want to deploy a certain number of digital wired products, digital wireless products. Again, Dante audio over IP interfacing to other kinds of systems that might be there, console mixing systems, or any kind of Dante enabled DSP that might be bringing paging into the system, and putting that all in again in one RACU.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned wired and wireless, and that's where I'd like to go next, kind of the shift toward wireless. As I say, I've been covering the industry for about 20 years or so, so we've been talking about wireless for a long time, but I'm interested in how system architectures are evolving and really the continuing developments in the wireless sphere.
Sure. And for a long time with UHF systems, it was very tough to deploy anything more than maybe 16 wireless belt packs, and the amount of antenna combination needed in that RF space, and then also the limitation of how much of that space is available in the United States, especially now. And so our move to wireless has also coincided with our move towards digital wireless systems, and specifically the DECT band in the United States. That's our 1.9 gigahertz band. And our architecture that's available now, again, in our original two-wire design, that was distributed amplifier systems. Now in our DECT 1.9 digital wireless systems, we've moved to distributed transceiver systems,
Mhm.
where a belt pack can operate in a space and connect to a dedicated transmit receive transceiver antenna, and then we can distribute those throughout a facility, and a belt pack can seamlessly roam from antenna to antenna, allowing for a much larger zone of coverage than what we could do with dedicated UHF antenna infrastructure in the past.
Yeah. Well, that seems to align with another trend that I kind of have my eye on, which is people just want the technology to kind of mold to them what they're doing, their workflow. They don't want to have to hew to the limitations of the technology. They want the
Sure.
technology to hew to them. And it seems like that's exactly what you're talking about.
And that move to the DECT band has done a few things. One, it stayed out of the Wi-Fi space. It stayed out of the ever more congested UHF space as well. Um, and it kind of self-coordinates. And so as we have created this more complex digital wireless system, it's also easier to add more and more users within that space. And now within the DECT band in the United States, within one given RF space, we can fit 50 FreeSpeak 2 users. And
Wow.
so, with that infrastructure that might be there, again, transceivers that are on an IP network, again, kind of going back to our first point of kind of a converged IP system, and then the amount of RF space that's available there, it becomes easier to deploy wireless for users than moving into a wired belt pack that might require some extra labor to get that one additional cable run to a spot operator or someone more remote from the broadcast control facility.
It really seems like Clearcom with your products, with your technologies, are speaking to exactly the pain points that you hear out there. I mean, you can't walk, 5 minutes without someone talking about the difficulties of RF congestion these days. And it seems like you're really kind of providing a solution.
Yeah, and that move to DECT was nice for us because we were intercom manufacturers were the first to kind of claim that space, and so we haven't had other wireless video systems or anything like that that have attempted to take over in that world as well.
Would you like to shift and talk a little bit about vertical markets and applications? For example, corporate communications, those kinds of things. How do you play there, and how do these points we've already talked about relate to that corporate communications segment?
Sure, and ClearCom really has come from two main verticals of theatrical live performance and the broadcast market. And what I have seen shift over the years now is that corporate communications, even just internal corporate communications, can resemble much more to a broadcast TV station these days, and the equipment that's needed for multi-site, large team management for internal meetings and content. And so sometimes that looks like a full matrix intercom system workflow. Again, much similar to a broadcast TV station, where you might have a centralized control room in one city that's remotely managing then over the internet or VPN to a offsite, a smaller office in a different market that's then managing some local content creation there, or even something that's being broadcast internally across the entire organization.
It's really interesting you bring that up because in my conversations with industry analysts and observers like Sean Wargo from Avixa, for example, they really say what they call is broadcast AV, not traditional broadcast, but that corporate broadcast, education broadcast
Sure.
in our more traditional vertical markets is growing rapidly. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of adoption. People are recognizing the utility, but of course they need the technologies to be able to underpin and undergird what they want to do. So it's really interesting that you're building on those core strengths that you talked about and moving into this really ripe growth market.
And again, since we've moved to a lot of IP-based infrastructure, that multi-site connectivity is easy for us to ingest and kind of interconnect through our systems. And we do have a few different ways of doing that. But one of them that's worth mentioning is our virtual client solution now, which is a computer, PC or Mac based app, or a mobile iOS, Android based application to allow for any smart device to become a virtual client on an intercom system to pass audio back and forth. And that allows for users that are off site to connect back to a central hub much easier. Again, multi site coordination, everything from the house of worship market to the broadcast market, but especially in this corporate multi venue, multi site connectivity.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, all of our teams are so dispersed nowadays, whether they're in the field or in different offices around the country, around the world. And but you want to be able to interconnect, you want to be able to communicate. And what we need is the infrastructure, the backbone infrastructure to make that happen seamlessly. And that's where ClearCom comes in, right?
Definitely. And a lot of our products are just how I say are just building blocks that can be assembled in different combinations of we want to have wireless belt packs available at this venue, so we have a local free speak infrastructure on those transceivers for a certain number of wireless camera operators or technicians there. But then those can be connected then locally to a control room or remotely to a control room completely somewhere else. Um, and we can bring in other third-party systems as well. It's worth mentioning our LQ boxes have been doing that for many years of bringing in other manufacturers' intercom systems to be able to talk within the ClearCom ecosystem as well.
So, is there anything, Brian, that you've not chatted about already that you'd like to discuss? I mean, it's been an information-packed conversation so far, but is there anything we haven't spoken about that you think our audience would like to know?
I think the last thing worth mentioning is our newest cloud-based intercom solution. And so historically, we've had the need for ClearCom hardware to be licensed in order to use these virtual client applications. And that does require, again, some uh, firewall port forwarding potentially to be able to put those systems onto the public internet for those devices to connect back to that piece of hardware. And depending on the organization, someone that might be touring or moving around a portable system that's trying to connect back to a home base, that becomes very difficult. And so our cloud-based solution now called Gen IC allows us to use a cloud infrastructure to license and manage all of the virtual client users and remote site connections. And so it is much more secure that way, where we're always pointing to this kind of dedicated cloud service rather than needing to put individual pieces of hardware that we own onto the internet. But also then much more expandable in the number of users that could be licensed in the cloud instead of what that individual piece of hardware, individual DSP limitation might be.
So, Brian, you mentioned Gen IC just now. We talked about Arcadia. We talked about Free Speak. We talked about Edge systems. If people want to learn more about what we've talked about so far today, if they're interested, if they want to find out perhaps how they can leverage this technology for their client or their own application, what's the first thing they should do? Whom should they reach out to? Where should they go? If this whetted their appetite, where can they get more?
Great question. So on our website, we do have several webinars that are available that we're going to be producing content over the next year. We also have a library of webinars that are available of previously recorded webinars. But another thing that's worth mentioning on the website is our solution finder page. And that is a great resource for anyone that has an existing ClearCom system or are interested in more technical information. It's basically a dedicated internal Wikipedia of all solutions that our applications engineering and tech support team have put together for existing customers. Everything from what are cable limitations of certain IP protocols to a general known switches that are known to work with our equipment, to pinouts of different GPIO connections or headset connections for all of our products. So Solution Finder is also a great resource that's available.
Sounds like a fantastic resource, a real treasure trove of information. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation and all the insights you've given about, again, the shift to IP, the shift to wireless, and the continuing rise of broadcast AV and the technologies that underpin it.
Thanks again for having me.
So happy to have been joined by Brian Grahn, who is Regional Sales Manager, Southwest USA with ClearCom. My name is Dan Farisi, Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. Please keep your eyes on commercialintegrator.com in the days, weeks, and months ahead for more exciting thought leadership content from leading brands like ClearCom that are really kind of driving us forward in the commercial AV industry. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.